Look, before I begin, I too just wanted to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge that we're gathered on stolen lands, that these lands have never been ceded by the Wurundjeri people or the Kulin Nation peoples, and until that wrong is rectified through a treaty or sovereign agreement, the injustices will continue. Just to introduce myself, I'm an Arundel woman from Central Australia. My traditional lands are Alice Springs and east and southeast of there. I'm also the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organiser for the National Tertiary Education Union, writer, commentator, general pain in the backside. Yeah. Look, I'm going to talk a little bit today about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues when it comes to continually being penalised by the government. And I wanted to say, just more broadly before I go into it, that the continual penalisation of the poor in this society, and the fact that current levels of welfare allowances are designed to keep poor people subordinate rather than assist people and provide a social safety net is an absolute disgrace. But one thing that we can't escape when it comes to any sort of welfare policy, any sort of discriminatory legislation and so on and so forth that governments choose to implement, is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are often the first groups of people that these disgusting policies are trialled upon. Mm-hmm. If we go back to 2007, when the Northern Territory intervention was rolled in, a lot of self-determined Aboriginal programs that existed in the Territory were wiped out overnight. And they were wiped out whilst... geez, that's interesting. They were wiped out whilst the government sent in tanks and, sent in army personnel and sent in police to ensure that communities were afraid, were scared. Some of them even ran off into the bush and left signs around the community, and what was seen as a joke by the media, but was actually quite a strong political statement if anyone wants to look up the Willera community signs. The Northern Territory intervention, as well as bringing in all of those discriminatory measures and effectively surveilling Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, what they're allowed to do and not do, putting signs out the front of the community saying no alcohol and no pornography beyond this point. So, putting a symbol of criminalisation in front of communities. Not only did it do that, but it also introduced the Basics card. And the Basics card, despite costing taxpayers significantly more to administer this stupid card, than simply just providing the payments to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, has continued and has been developed over the years. It also has worked in a way that a lot of the Basics card has morphed into other programs such as the Inju card. And I can't help but think that this program of welfare quarantining has more to do with governments wanting to keep their wealthy corporation mates wealthy than what it does actually assisting the most vulnerable in our society, because naturally deals had to be made with big organisations such as Coles Myer, Wesfarmers, Inju itself, in order to administer them. People were left with chicken feed whilst these big businesses continued to profiteer off what is taxpayers' dollars. And meanwhile, there were reports that were coming out of communities, Aboriginal communities, following the introduction of the Basics card, which in the intervention, which, by the way, in case anyone has forgotten, which I doubt anyone here has, the intervention was apparently to to stop alcohol abuse and to stop the abuse of women and children within communities. Not only did malnutrition increase in communities, but so too did instances of violence. On top of that, a few years back, the government then decided to bring in the Community Development Program, or the CDP. And they rolled it out to a vast section of Australia, so that what are communities that are 83% Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who were on welfare payments were forced into unpaid work, so work for the dole programs, but instead of the usual work for the dole programs which existed then for everyone else, it was 25 hours per week, year round, and not only are government providers allowed to take part in it, so too are private enterprises. So effectively, you've got private enterprises profiteering off an endless pool of free Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander labour. And of course, what happened under those programs where we saw a vast increase in the penalisation for non-compliance when it came to welfare payments. So I believe it was about 70% increase in penalisation compared to anyone else who receives it. And, you know, it's these sorts of penalties when you're living in a remote community that often doesn't have phone reception and doesn't have access to the nearest Centrelink office can take, you know, 8 weeks, a few months to undo. So people were going hungry whilst being forced to do work in order to just get a welfare payment. The thing with these works, so 25 hours per week is a pretty decent part-time job, I would have thought, and under normal employment circumstances someone working that amount would be able to access would be able to accumulate super, they'd have access to OHS provisions, they would be protected in various ways, shapes and forms. If accidents happened within CDP placements, what protections are there for the workers? And what sort of assurance, based on the fact that they've rolled this out to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, you know, how many election cycles do we need to go through? And my guess would be 1 to 2 before we see this exact same disgusting program just rolled out across the country. I will say this, despite last year being a really rough year, under COVID, the CDP was suspended, and all of a sudden a lot of these people who were exploited under the CDP not only found themselves not having their labour exploited, but also found themselves surprisingly with a reasonable amount of money to survive on for the first time ever. They now not only have people returned to the exploitative working conditions under CDP, but already severely impoverished communities are about to have their money further cut. Are we going to continue to allow the government to exploit the labour of unemployed workers whilst their wealthy mates profiteer?
No.
I just want to finish by saying we need to support a living wage. We need to support a safety net that looks after our most vulnerable, and we need to stop the exploitation of the most vulnerable people in this society and their labour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.